Another word, this is the second last of our series, so next week is our last word or two, and then we're going to start a new series about some really practical topics, and it's going to be called But Why? So in other words, there's things that we do sometimes in church, but we'll dig into the but why part of it, and why do we do these things, and it's important for us to do. So we're going to look at things like baptism and membership and those sorts of things, and just sort of say, but why do we do them? What's the purpose of them? And we're going to start. Our first topic is going to be communion, and we're going to actually enjoy communion together on a long weekend in a couple of weeks. So that's sort of where we're going after this one. But today we have a word, and it is, this is going to be painful. All right, Jake, I have not a hot clue why this is not going forward. It's just stuck. Okay, devoted. So, the word we have today is devoted, and it's one of those words that we probably think of some really positive things about, don't we? When we think of being devoted, we think of it being devoted to as a positive thing, particularly in a relationship of some sort, right? And surprisingly, when we look at the word in the scriptures, it is surprisingly negative in its connotations. I don't know about you, but if we sort of think of devoted as a negative thing, that sort of changes a whole bunch of things. I think it makes like phrases or songs like "hopelessly devoted to you" take on a whole new meaning, and I don't think that's the intent here. And it certainly makes things like being devoted to God, or even when we take time to read His Word, we actually call them devotions. Now, why we call them that, I don't really know, but the Bible, in its use of this word in particular, this particular word, generally accepts it as a negative idea. And by that, you'll just see what I mean, because I'll give you the definition of it up here. And so the definition of the word devoted, the Hebrew word is kerem, and it means this. Now, this is sort of the Strong's version of it. So it's physically or shutting a net. So the idea of capturing and destroying. So the idea of fishing with a net, you catch fish, haul them out of the water, and you have them for lunch. Usually it is identified or connected to a doomed object or dedicated thing or things that should be utterly destroyed. And in fact, interestingly, as I was sort of doing the backstory research on these things, if we look at the word, not in English but in Hebrew, almost every time in the Old Testament, except in a few occasions, it doesn't get translated devoted, it gets translated utterly destroyed. So I thought that was kind of curious as I was sort of doing the looking into, the digging into all of the uses of it. But in the ESV, which is what we usually use up here on the screen, when that word, instead of being utterly destroyed, it almost in every case comes across as devoted to destruction. So one sort of has a past thought to it, one sort of has a future thought to it, but the reality is this, that it's still a very negative concept. There's a couple of times in the King James where it actually gets used, the words get used, devoted to destruction. We're going to use those as a jumping off point today. And I hope that we're going to not just see sort of the negative parts of it, but I think we need to see the proactive parts of it as well. So hopefully when we put it all together, we'll do that. So this whole idea of utter destruction and being devoted to utter destruction. In other words, that's its destiny, or that's its end story. That's where we're sort of going to lean. So I wanted to sort of say this. Number one, first of all, it's not always a negative idea. In fact, if you turn to Leviticus, which is where you'd find about that holy to the Lord thing on the high priest's forehead. At the very end of the book, Leviticus is sort of saying to the priests or the Levites, here's what I want you to do. If people make vows or promises to God, this is the way I want you to handle it. So when we get to the end of Leviticus chapter 27, we see these words for us given, and they're talking about this whole idea of being devoted. But no devoted thing that a man devotes to the Lord of anything that he has, whether man or beast, or of his inherited fields, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy to the Lord. Let's stop right there, first of all. So here's the idea, is that it's not always a negative thing. In fact, in this one verse in particular, we have a very positive thought. And it's this whole idea of people willingly choosing to give out of their abundance that God has blessed them with, things to God. And it's called being devoted. Same word, same root word in Hebrew, but a very positive spin. The whole idea is understand that God has given people lots and blessed them, and as a result of understanding God's goodness in their lives, they choose to dedicate part of their harvest, part of their animals, to some degree, even giving of themselves to God. And so the whole idea is that if someone or something or part of this person's accumulated wealth was seen as abundant blessing of God, they would devote it or give it back to the temple for God to use. And so it was one of the ways that the people at the temple and the Levites all were taken care of. Because remember, Levites didn't get any land, they got cities. And so they were reliant on God's people and the blessing of God on his people, and therefore them devoting or giving or setting apart parts of the things that God has given to them to take care of them. So it's a very positive thing. And so it's people understanding that all that we have is a blessing of God. It is the gift of God. And as a result, they would give back to God or dedicate it back to God. And they would say, God, this is for you to use. And they would, in many cases, take it to the temple. Now, did you get what it said, though? It says it won't be redeemed. In other words, it won't be sold and cash brought back in. It was God's provision for his servants, the Levites. And so it wasn't to be sold at a profit. It was simply to be utilized, understanding that God had blessed others and they were blessing the Levitical priests. So the first thing we get is that it was given to them because God had blessed them so much. And it's given completely, entirely, totally to God. It's not really even ours at any point. And there's a thought for us to sort of understand. The things that we have really are only ours to enjoy. They're really not ours to own. Now, that kind of flies in the face of a lot of things. Like I think I own my house and I think I own my car. But the reality is, everything that we have in our lives is a good gift of God. And really, it all should belong to him. And we just get to use it. And as a result of us using it, we ought to be able to honor him with all of the things that he has given us in our lives. That sort of changes the way we look at life and economics and I think wealth and all kinds of things. And I think that's a good thing for us to go through. And so this part of devoted is the positive part. It's the part where we recognize that all that we have is from God and that he has blessed us exceptionally. And as a result of our understanding that God has been so good to us, we give back to him part of it. And part of the process was to say, above and beyond the requirements, we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, of the law that people had to give, there was this opportunity for them to say, God has been good to me. I'm going to devote this. I'm going to give this amount above and beyond what's required, just as a thanks to God for what he has done, and make that vow, make that promise. So that's sort of the first part. And so it's not always negative, but it's usually negative, let's be honest. And in fact, when you sort of do the word study in the ESV in particular, where it takes all those utterly destroyed and turns them into devoted for destruction, it goes from like 4 words to like 80 words. And it's mostly a negative idea. So it's going to bring lots of questions, I'm sure. But no one devoted, verse 29 of Leviticus says, who is devoted for destruction. I'm really thankful the person that gave me this word told me this is what they were thinking of. They had a question like, what is this about? Why would things be devoted to destruction? That seems like a very harsh thing for God to do. Okay? But who is to be devoted to destruction? That kind of says like God has marked out some people to be taken out. Well, let me just, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, I want us to remember that the wages or the consequences, the outcome of sin is death. In Romans it tells us that. In James it tells us that sin, when it has grown up to maturity, it brings forth death. So the reality is this, that every one of us who's a sinner, and we all have sinned, and we've all fallen short of God's glory. See, we all really deserve death. So there's this idea, this concept that God has said the destruction is going to be the reality for some people. And who are those people? Well, I think at the end of it, we're going to say the ones that are completely disobedient and antagonistic towards God. But let's keep going. No one devoted who is to be devoted for destruction from mankind shall be ransomed. In other words, there is no hope. There's a hint of the gospel in there, right? That this whole idea of those that reject God and his plan and his purpose and his fulfilling of the sacrifice for our sinfulness, those that reject that, there is no hope. There's no redemption for them. He shall be put to death. So that's sort of the flip side. That's the negative side of the story. And so while it can be a very positive thing, it can also become a very negative thing. Let me just sort of take you back to 1 Samuel chapter 15. So as we look at this idea and understand that it is usually negative, there are some positive aspects to it, but there's negative things to it, I want you to see consequences that come out of this, and I think there's some really good life lessons for us to learn. So, 1 Samuel, I should turn to it. 1 Samuel 15, and starting at verse 1, we'll just sort of get the story here. There's lots of backstory here, but I'll give you the real short version of it. Israel is now camped against their enemies. And the Amalekites are there, and the battle is about to come. And Samuel has said to Saul, you go ahead, get ready, and you be there. And just as I arrive, I will bring sacrifices to God that he will bless our endeavors as we take on the Amalekites, who are the enemies of God. And so we'll ask God for blessing and for victory in that battle. Saul, for whatever reason, decides he's not going to listen to Samuel. Maybe he got a little scared. Maybe he got a little, let's get going. I'm not sure exactly what the core motivation was, but Saul takes it upon himself to offer sacrifice instead of obeying Samuel and waiting. Now Saul, we know, from the tribe of Benjamin, not a Levite, not a priest, not supposed to be offering sacrifices. That was the whole point of the Levitical priesthood. Saul just goes ahead and does it. Samuel, the prophet, not going to get in the way of that. So he goes forward. So there's the backstory. And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel and opposing them on the way, and they came out of Egypt. Now go and straight Amalek and devote to destruction all they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, and camel and donkey. So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 men on foot and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. Then Saul said to the Kenites, go down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you from them, for you showed kindness to all the people of Israel when they came out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. And Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction. Okay, seems like obedience, right? All the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fattened calves, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. The word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, for he's turned his back from following me and has not performed my commandments. So here's sort of strike two in the process. And Samuel was angry, and he cried to the Lord all night. Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, and it was told to Samuel, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, and turned and passed on and went down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed be you to the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of oxen that I hear? And Saul said, and here's the most amazing part. And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction. And Samuel said to Saul, stop. I will tell you what the Lord said to me on this night. And he said to him, speak. And Samuel said, though you are little in your own eyes, you're not the head of the tribes of Israel. The Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go, devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what is evil in the sight of the Lord? Well, there's lots in there. But here's Saul, who has now begun a pattern of doing things his way in his timing. And Saul, probably even well-intended, was disobedient. And here's the thing. God says, there is this group of wicked people, and they need to be eliminated. We need to wipe them out. Now, we can talk about God's justice and God's mercy all day long, but I think if we understand that the wages of sin is death, the timing is really the only issue. And the Amalekites were part of those Canaanite groups of people, and we don't want to get into the details of it, but they were involved in idolatry, they were involved in gross immorality, and they even had gone to the points of sacrificing their own children to their gods. And so the abominations that were there were incredible. And they had no interest, no inclination. In fact, they had become the enemies of God's people, therefore the enemies of God himself. And so these were the enemies of God. They were not seekers of God. I don't know if there's any nuance that we want to bring there, but the reality is this. These are wicked people, and God says they cannot coexist with my people that are called to be holy. And so he says they are appointed to destruction. The consequence of sin is always death. You need to understand that. But God, in a special way, devoted them to destruction. Was it to serve as a great illustration to all of the nations that you cannot win against the holy, omnipotent God? All of the things that we could learn there are probably enormous. But at the end of the day, this is what's happened. God has said the Amalekites must be eliminated. They are godless idolaters who do horrible things. And they disobey so much of what God wanted his people to do. So they had to be gone. And so here we have this picture. And I think we have some questions that we sort of got to ask ourselves. And these are really the questions that we really need to sort of muddle through today. Why does God want Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites? Like, what was the purpose of the reason? And I think we've sort of talked through some of the potential ones for that. I know it seems like an incredibly harsh sentence for God to pass on to a people group, but the reality is, like we've talked about already, that is the result of our sinfulness, no matter who we are. Utter destruction. It's only a matter of time. So the whole idea is obedience to God and faith in God and wanting to please God is the only way out. And the only way we can do that is not in ourselves, but through what Jesus has done for us, by understanding that he has paid the penalty for my sin so that I don't deserve any longer the same penalty that the Amalekites deserved or anybody else that is the enemy of God. And God says, anyone that opposes me, and anyone that disobeys me, anyone that shakes their fist in my face, deserves death. So why does he want to do that? I think it's just to show his power and his authority. And ultimately, it's the Amalekites getting exactly what they asked for. And I mean that in the most literal sense. They had said, we will follow our gods. We will please our gods. We will do what we want to do. We will disregard the God of the universe, the creator God. We've chosen to go our way and not the God of the Israelites' way. We have chosen disobedience. And so disobedience will always lead to death, because that's what it is. The wages of sin is death. So why would God do that? Because that's essentially what they have been asking for all along. It's only by the mercy of God that we are not consumed. How that all works and why he chooses to let sinful people survive, it's only his mercy. It's only his mercy. So if we ever look at the Old Testament and say, well, God is a vengeful God, he's a God of anger. No, he's a God of justice, and his mercy and his grace is seen on every page where he does not immediately, categorically judge sin. See, so the pages of the Old Testament we can look at and say they're violent and horrible, and they are, but they are nothing compared to what we deserve. So, that's the why, I think. But why was God angered with Saul? Why was God angered with Saul? Because Saul disobeyed too. God said, I want you to go and I want you to utterly destroy all of the people, and especially the leader, because he's the one that's actually pointing them in that direction and leading them away from the one true God. But also destroy all of the things that they've accumulated. So there's no reason to benefit in any way from the judgment of God. That should not be a thing that people benefit from. He said, wipe them all out, destroy them, utterly destroy them. Saul, his way of thinking, already doing things his own way, says, well, you know what? Here's the deal. I'm not going to do what God says. I'm going to do what I think is best. And so they kept the king. They kept him alive, probably as a trophy, just to sort of say, hey, listen, look at, this is the kind of king I am. I defeated this guy. Able to parade him around and use him as a sort of a entertainment piece to say, hey, look at what I can do. That's how powerful I am. And then they sort of cloak their disobedience in this great spirituality. Well, we kept the best, like like all the busted up animals and the ones that were hobbling around. For sure, we just destroyed them. We just got rid of them, like for sure. But God, we just want you to know that we kept the very best of their animals to sacrifice to you. Now, it sounds like a very spiritual thing to do, doesn't it? Like, wow, I'm gonna, and Samuel's words, isn't it better to be obedient than to sacrifice? Isn't that what God really wants? Isn't it better to be obedient than to sacrifice? See, the things that God had said were devoted to destruction, that had come to the place or the point of judgment, needed to be gotten rid of. And Saul says, no. I have a better plan, God, than your plan. I'm going to do things my way. And I'm even going to cloak it in a whole bunch of religious ideas and say, God, we're not even doing it for us. We're doing it for you. We're disobeying God for your benefit. That's a bit twisted, is it not? God is not pleased with Saul. In fact, he's sad at this point that he has made Saul king. The last question I put up, I think, is the one that we sort of need to look at. Because here's the reality. We can look, we look at Saul. I know we all do. We go, well, yeah, what a stupid thing to do. Like, what a loser. Why would he do that? Like, who's he trying to kid? And yet, probably there's something in your life, for sure there's something in my life that I'm holding on to, that I like more than I like obeying God, that I love more than I love obedience to God. And there's probably something in your life too that should be devoted to destruction, and you are holding onto it. Probably is. I won't begin to tell you what it is, but my guess is we probably already know. My guess is you're probably already thinking about it. It's that. Anger, bitterness, pride. Maybe it's other things that you just know are flat out wrong. Maybe it's sinful actions and habits that you just enjoy too much to really just get out of my life. But that was the point. That was really, I think, the point of the whole story, is that God says there are things that ought to be devoted to destruction. There are things in this world that are such a hindrance to fellowship and responsibility towards me that they just need to go. There's probably something in your life and in my life that just today should be devoted to destruction. Just get rid of it. It has no place in our lives. And so I think there's the evaluation question that we have to be asking ourselves. What is it in my life that needs to go? What is it that is this constant picture of disobedience toward God, who's declared that disobedience will always result in his punishment and ultimately in death? There's a question that we have to ask ourselves. What is it that's just got to go? So that instead of leading a life that displeases God, I get to lead a life that actually pleases the God who made me, who pleases the God that sent his son to die for me, for my sin, for all that grossness, to have that disobedient stuff dealt with. What is it that I'm holding on to that flat out just needs to go? What is it in my life I need to devote to destruction? Let's pray, and we're done. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the challenge that it is. And God, thank you for the really harsh word picture of the Amalekites and the whole idea that we can just choose to disobey and think that we're going to get away with it. God, I pray that you just work in our own hearts today. You work in my heart today. That you just show me the things in my life that are just flat out disobedient to you, and then give me and give each one of us the strength to confess them, to admit them, and then to destroy them in our lives so we can really live lives that please you. God, we thank you that you do show us mercy, that you don't give us what we deserve every moment, that you are a God who is patient with really broken, messy people. And so we thank you that you are a God who is not just a God of justice, but you are a God of mercy and grace and love as well. And so because of that, because of your great love for us, that you sent your son, we thank you. And we want to live lives that please you. So God, work in our hearts and our lives today. Help us to be different because we've engaged with you in this time together. And we'll thank you and praise you